hearty welcome to Grandma's Wealth Wisdom with your hospitable hosts, Brandon and Amanda Neely. This is the only podcast for strategies to grow your wealth simply and sustainably, like Grandma used to. Without further ado, here are your hosts.
Hey, I'm Brandon, and welcome to Grandma's Wealth Wisdom, where we help you build wealth Grandma would be proud of.
And I'm Amanda. Today we're going to be continuing a 3-part series about the FIRE movement. In case you missed the last episode, FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early, F-I-R-E.
If you missed the last episode or aren't following this whole FIRE movement, and we're not just talking about fires in your furnace or any of that kind of stuff, we're talking about this idea, financial independence to retire early. But if you don't know what that is, I still want you to listen to this episode because we're going to be sharing the top fire extinguishers that could possibly wreak some havoc on anyone's financial strategy, whether you're in lots of debt or about to retire early. If you want to do that, if you're not following this fire movement, if you are, these extinguishers can affect us.
Yeah, I do have a poll for the audience. Is it wreak havoc or wreck havoc? Because Brandon said wreak, but I would say wreck. If you have an opinion about that, please let us know.
Probably wreck. I don't know.
I think it's wreck havoc.
I'm from the South. I don't know. I say words that don't make sense.
But I also do that too. So let us know. What do you say? Wreak havoc or wreck havoc? And regardless of what you say, these fire extinguishers could apply to you.
They could wreck your havoc. Wreck havoc.
Exactly. It's wreck havoc.
Yeah,
I knew it was. I think I got it. Okay. So a little bit more background about fire that we did not share in the previous episode. There are kind of 2 fire camps, not to be confused with campfires. If you want to help those affected by the campfire in Northern California right now, the place to go is to the Red Cross. Please send your support there and help those that are being affected by that fire and other disasters that happen.
Or enjoy campfire, but probably not in December. Anyway, fire camps later.
Yeah.
It's a fun thing to do. I love campfires.
Right. So within the fire movement, there are kind of 2 camps. First, there are kind of the Silicon Valley types who were working 100 plus hours per week, and they're at the end of their ropes, close to burnout, or maybe even already burnt out. So they decide they're going to save as much money as they can. Then they can quit their jobs and move to a tiny house in Colorado, for example. Then they can spend more of their time doing what they love, and they can get their personal health in order too because they've reduced their expenses. They have this huge nest of money saved up, and they can just live their lives.
They can finally go to the gym.
And do what they love, get some sleep, not have to drink Red Bull all the time or whatever it is.
Yep.
Then there are those who are in the second camp that build up passive income through things like rental properties until the income from the rentals is equal to or more than their expenses. So then they don't have to work anymore at a day job kind of thing because they're bringing in such income from their rentals that it covers all of their personal expenses. And then there's kind of people who are a combination of these 2 camps. Maybe they have a pile of money that they live off a little bit of that, and they're doing some rental properties, or they create a business that has more passive income, and they also have a big nest egg. You can have a combination of those 2, but that's kind of the 2 ways that people think about getting to financial independence.
The fire camps. There you go. So before we get into the list of fire extinguishers, I want to share 2 of the really great benefits of the fire that Grandma would love too. So there's, again, those 2 things. One is minimalism. People who are pursuing or have already fired live with less typically. They don't clutter their lives with meaningless materials. And this not only impacts their wallets, but also helps steward the resources we have on the planet.
Yeah, this idea of minimalism is one of the things that really attracts me about the FIRE movement. I'm definitely more of a minimalist. I actually forced Brandon to go through a minimalist class with me And we got rid of some stuff, although I'm still working on him.
Yeah, I still like things and
tchotchkes.
Yeah.
If you look in our closet, you'll see he has way more clothes than I do.
And little toys or whatever else. I got all kinds of crazy
all
stuff.
around his desk are a bunch of toys. But Grandma, she loves this idea of fire and this minimalism about fire because they're living a lot like her, simply and sustainably. And that's good, not just for them, but also for the planet. And that really makes Grandma proud.
So I'll work on some of that minimalism. The next one is time. Fire isn't just about financial wealth. Fire is mostly about taking back control of your time. And the goal is to never exchange your time for money. Instead, you can spend your time doing what you love and have more time to spend with family and friends and doing, going to a campfire. There you go.
Right. The thing about this that really appeals, I think, to Brandon and me both is that we're entrepreneurs. We've been entrepreneurs for a decade and or like self-identified and been trying to be entrepreneurs, that kind of thing. But regardless of that, like in entrepreneurial speak, we talk all the time about getting your business to where you're not trading your time for money. And at that point, you can grow and scale and do all kinds of things. But if you're exchanging your time for money, then you don't really have a business. Maybe you're more of a solo entrepreneur or a freelancer or that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So that goes really well with what we're talking about. Like with the fire movement, maybe for some of them, it's getting out of a job. That's where you're exchanging your time for money. And that if you have that big nest egg, you don't have to do that anymore. And of course, Grandma loves this idea too, because she's all about spending more time with family and doing what you really love, especially if what you love involves gardening, canning, sewing, cooking from scratch, some of those lost arts from past generations.
We're doing some of that lost art with having the baby now and cooking a lot more, which, I guess before we would just eat more fast food and
also like making baby food from scratch is way more cost effective and it's way healthier for the baby. So fire movements have babies, I bet, are doing a lot, like the people within the fire movement that have babies are probably doing kind of similar to how we are with how we feed our baby.
Gotcha.
But without further ado now, we can get into this list of fire extinguishers. We're going to go through them as quickly as we can so we can fit them all in. We're not going to be able to really do a deep dive on any of these today. We've done that in some previous episodes. We'll do that in future episodes. But we want to give you this list. You could write down these 8 fire extinguishers and think through your own finances. And are any of these a threat to what you're currently planning for yourself and for your future?
And not just currently, but they possibly can.
Right. And whenever you're working with a financial professional, you could ask them, how is what you are suggesting vulnerable to these fire extinguishers, or how are they not vulnerable? Yep. And how could they withstand these? So write down these 8, use that list. We'll have them in the show notes too, and think through these things wherever you're at.
So the first one is putting money in prison in a tax-deferred plan, aka qualified funds.
Yeah, the tax-deferred plan, you might know these as 401k, 403b, IRA, those kinds of things. If you are planning to retire early, if your money is in one of these types of plans, then it's kind of like it's in prison. The way that the laws are right now, if you're younger than 59 and a half and you get access, you take out these funds for other than than certain things that they let you do it for. But let's say it's just to buy groceries or pay your rent or whatever. And it's you're younger than 59 and a half, you have to pay a 10% penalty. So if you want to retire early, let's say at 55 even, you're going to look at 4.5 years of paying that penalty. Or let's say you want to retire even earlier, your money's in prison for that whatever length of time until you turn 59 and a half. And still with those they're called tax deferred plans because you've delayed paying taxes on that money. Even with a Roth type plan and you've paid taxes on the money you've put in, you're still deferring taxes on the growth. And so the money within those is really strictly monitored and strictly enforced, all these different laws and stuff by the government. It's a government plan. So it's basically like saying, okay, this nest egg that I'm going to try to save up, I'm in all intents and purposes giving it to the government to have. until I'm ready to use it. But because they have it, they have all these rules and laws that have to be followed in order to use that in the future.
So that's the first one. There's this other one that's sequence of return. Could you explain that one, Amanda? That one's a little, seems a little crazy.
Yeah, this is one that I'd never heard about until I was working in the financial sector. And it's kind of hard to explain without like a chart and going through the numbers. So I'm going to do my best here on the podcast to explain this. So let's say you have Jane and you have Jim, and they both have $500,000 just sitting in a brokerage account in an index that's tied to the S&P 500. So it's just sitting there. There's nothing, like it's not locked away in a 401k or anything like that. It's there, and the index is following the S&P 500. And then they retire early, and they start taking out, they follow the 4% rule. They start taking out $20,000 the first year. And over the next 16 years, they continue taking that out plus a little bit more for inflation. So Jane and Jim take out the same amount every single year for the next 16 years. Yet, at the end of the 16 years, Jane has $74,300. And Jim has $344,200.
Somebody's losing there.
Right. There's a $270,000 difference roughly between what Jane has and what Jim has. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that we took the actual returns year by year that the S&P 500 did, the index that they're following, and Jane followed exactly what it did for 16 years. And Jim, all we did was take what actually happened and invert it. So what happened for Jane in year 1 happened for Jim in year 16. And then Jane's year 2 became Jim's year 15. And then Jane's year 16 became Jim's year 1, and so forth. So they got the same average return, but their return was in different orders. The same return every year, but flipped. That's the only thing that we changed. And that was a $270,000 difference in what they had at the end of those 16 years.
That's $270,000 like loss for one of them. And they still got that, what is that? The average return?
Right. They still got an average, good average return.
Same average.
Yep. So that's called sequence of return risk. And it basically means the volatility of the stock market has a bigger impact as you're taking your money out and using it.
Gotcha.
Volatility can really impact how much you have.
Grandma always said, eat your vegetables. She loved making home-cooked meals with healthy food and from-scratch desserts. Would you create a diet of fast food or cookie-cutter financial products that made you fat and bloated with fees? Or would you like wholesome, time-honored wealth strategies served with balance and trust? Get started with your healthy money planning by downloading Wholesome Wealth Recipes. Your Moolah cookbook is waiting for you at grandmaswealth.com.
And we're not even done. That's a lot of money lost there. We still got some extinguishers, like the big one, taxes, or like we call it here, the Internal Revenue Service. Dun, dun, dun.
Right. So with taxes, we did a whole episode about this before.
We got a war to pay for. That was the episode.
The name of the episode. And what we learned in that episode is that we're at historically low tax rates. If you look at the income tax from when it started in 1913 compared to today, and you follow it all the way through, their taxes are actually pretty low. But what if you're 10, 15, 20 years into your early retirement or your financial independence, and all of a sudden Congress passes a law, president signs it, all those kind of things, and the Internal Revenue Service now can take more of your money. Instead of paying maybe a 20% tax rate, you're up to a 30 or 40% tax rate. That could totally throw out of whack your financial independence formula. It could mean that you're not able to now cover your bills on a regular basis with your passive income, or that you have to take out more of your nest egg in order to pay those taxes and still have enough to cover your expenses. So an increase in the tax rate could really be a fire extinguisher to your fire.
And I've heard it said that taxes will most likely go up at some point by people of authority. They've been touting that, so we don't know, but it's
a possible extinguisher.
And then the fourth is inflation.
Yeah, so this is where the cost of goods goes up. It's called inflation. It's based on a fancy thing called the Consumer Price Index that someone at the federal government sets. And we typically think of inflation as like 3%. It's like an average nice number that most people use to account for inflation. Yet, there's a couple of problems with that. We have experienced times where inflation's been a lot more than that. I heard in 1980 that the inflation rate was 15%. So can you imagine paying 15% more tomorrow than you do today for that gallon of milk or a gallon of gas or what have you? And then also within that, the Consumer Price Index is exactly what it sounds like, an index. It's an average. It's a rough idea of what prices are doing. But within that, you could have some expenses that increase a lot more than other expenses. So if you love milk, but milk is having huge inflation, maybe there's a cow plague or something and there's fewer cows, so there's less milk and the price of milk is shooting up, then you could experience, maybe a 50% increase on your milk, whereas maybe your gallon of gas stays relatively low and you don't have a huge inflation on that. So
we did have a gas shortage at one point, I think.
Yeah, that's happened in the past, yeah. Or what we've actually seen over the last 20 years or so is that the highest rates of inflation have been in things like the cost of education and the cost of medical expenses. So let's say it costs you $200 to go do your annual checkup each year with your physician, and you account for that cost going up 3% each year. But what if it goes up by 15% in certain years or that kind of thing? It's hard to know what's going to happen with inflation overall, but also with things in particular.
Yeah, I would think people who went to school even like 15 years ago and the cost of going to school now is totally different.
Yeah, prescription medication is another example.
Yeah. So inflation is a huge thing that we, again, don't have any control over. Another one is fees.
Yeah, so we could talk a lot about different fees that our government charges. Like in Chicago, we have a city sticker. We have to pay that fee every year. What if that cost goes up? And of course, we pay all kinds of different fees in our lifetime. Late fees, interest fees, like all kinds of things. But if you have this big pile of money or you're saving up this big pile of money, one of the biggest fees is going to be that asset under management fee that whoever it is that's managing your money for you charges you. And the fire movement people, they definitely try to get this fee as low as possible, but it is something to factor in. Here's something that might surprise you. Let's say you get a 7% annual return on your money. That's a really good percentage. You probably hired a really good person to manage your money for you. 7% annual return. And so in order to get you that annual return, they charge you a 1% fee, which is decent. 1.5% as I've heard is an average if you have your money in like an IRA. Some fire people are able to get way less than that, but let's just say 1%. At the end of 35 years, so they've had this big pile of money for you, they've grown it a little bit, but they've taken that 1% management fee. That would mean at the end of 35 years that your savings is actually decreased by 28%.
What, 28%?
Yeah, so if you had a plan at the end of 35 years to have $1 million, you had that 7% growth and you didn't factor in the fees, that fee would actually decrease that $1 million by $280,000.
Wow.
That fee would have eaten up of your savings. That can be a pretty big expense to not remember to calculate in. That could totally put out your fire.
I think in general, there's so many little fees in our life and we don't account for them, and that can really affect our lives. So really even just thinking about fees and all kinds of ways and where am I being feed for things. The sixth one is medical expenses and long-term care.
Yeah, all I'm going to say about this one is that the average 65-year-old retiring today will probably need about $250,000 to cover their medical expenses and another $250,000 to cover long-term care. And about 70% of retirees need the long-term care they're going to need that at some point. So that's $500,000 just for the average 65-year-old today. It's going to be about 30 years until I'm 65. I wonder how much that's going to be then. And that could totally put out my fire when I'm 65. That would be like taking a bucket of ice water and throwing it on my fire. If I, like not even all of a sudden, if I just have routine things that I need, or and then for the long-term care, if I have dementia or Alzheimer's or cancer, or there's all kinds of different things that could happen that could mean
that you don't know about.
Right.
The 7th is major expenses like cars or a house.
Yeah. So the thing about this is that those expenses could decrease your fund that you have or mean that your monthly expenses go up. There's different ways to factor that in, but definitely something to be thinking about is how are you going to replace that car when it eventually breaks down? Or how are you going to help your kids pay with college? Can you even help your kids pay for college if you're doing the FIRE movement? Or trying to just be financially independent? Like, how do these major expenses fit in, and make sure you're factoring those in?
And the 8th and final one, I'm sure there's others, is once the money is used, it's gone. Like there's that, like you don't have it anymore.
Yeah, and it's not going to continue to grow. So you're losing any compounding. You've destroyed compound interest. If you're taking that nest egg and you're living off the growth each year, you've destroyed any compounding. Even if you never get into the principal, the nest that you have there, you're still destroying any compounding that's happened. And once you spend that money, you can't go get it back. And so you gotta think through how is that working for you.
So Amanda, what if I told you there was a way to save for whatever your financial goals were, to build independence, have that awesome retirement, to be able to grow your business, able to buy a home, you're able to pay for college, etc., and avoid these extinguishers of any of your personal or business goals? If you're able to do that, have fire and avoid the extinguishers, what would you say about that?
That would be pretty cool. And since I already know what's in the next episode, I'll just tease everyone that we'll be spilling the hot coals in the next episode. We'll be going into lots of detail about this perfect match for fire. In other words, we're going to get lit. But for now, the thing to know is that the strategy that we're going to share next time is one that we've seen personal benefit from. And it's also an asset class that half of all Americans were using for financial independence back in Grandma's day.
So we've been spending our time these days working with individuals, couples, and entrepreneurs to achieve more wealth than they thought possible. We've experienced this ourselves and want to help others experience it as well. So if you want to be part of building wealth and avoiding those fire extinguishers, you can reach out to us, discover our strategies yourself. All you have to do is go to grandmaswealthwisdom.com and click request a meeting. And right there, we'll have 15 minutes to just chat, get to know some of your goals and concerns, those kind of things. I would love to hear more from you.
Yeah, so like I alluded to earlier, next time we'll be digging into this perfect match for fire. It's a great concept for getting fired.
Until next time, keep building your wealth simply and sustainably for your own future and the future of our grandchildren's generation. The topics presented in this podcast are for general information only and not for the purpose of providing legal, accounting, or investment advice. On such matters, please consult a professional who knows your specific situation.
This is the podcastfactory.com.